Hi, everybody. This is Andy Goldfine at the Aerostich Podcast. The date today is November 4th, 2024, and our guest is Chris Canterbury. Chris is a very, very old friend. We've known each other for about 35 years, and in the Venn diagrams of life, where you have these overlapping circles, Chris's circle and mine have intersected multiple times. He's a renowned customizer of BMW motorcycles, a renowned supplier of custom parts and also used parts, and he's also a specialist in customizing air-cooled VW cars and vans. He's just got a body of work that is so wide, artistically diverse, that to me he's always been a real most interesting man in the world, not the parody guy on the Dos Equis beer commercials, but an actual man with an amazing life story that has many twists and turns, and I'd like you to meet him. Chris, thanks for coming on the Aerostich Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. And good to see you again. It's been a while.
It has been a while. You're from Chico, California.
Yep, way in the north.
And I would love you to introduce yourself to the Aerostich Podcast audience right now.
Well,
with a little biography.
As we know, my name is Chris Canterbury. I've been around cars and motorcycles and things with wheels my whole life. My dad had hot rods and race cars and drag cars and motorcycles. And so I grew up around that. And at one point, my parents had a hobby shop, and I grew up around that with slot cars and plastic models. And at a young age, I learned how to ride a bicycle and then started customizing those. And I just kind of never stopped from about the age 5 or 6, taking something that was perfectly fine and changing it, making it my own.
That making it your own idea is central to your whole history of accomplishments in life. You've made products that are mass-produced products in this era, your own, as long as I've known you, and you've become well known in many areas for doing it. Your breakthrough products have been a slammed stretch Volkswagen Beetle that went to the Bonneville Salt Flats, and also a twin turbo airhead BMW. Those got you wide exposure, but there are many, many other products that have been recognized by motorcycle and car magazine editors and are sought by collectors all over the world. Can you give me a little more detail about how you ended up with the basically air-cooled German engineered vehicles?
Well, my dad worked for a Volkswagen dealer and a Porsche BMW dealer. They're owned by two brothers most of my life. And so the passion for air-cooled came from that. And in the 80s, a friend of mine that I'd known most of my life and happened to be my boss at the time at the Porsche BMW dealership I grew up in told me about two old BMW motorcycles sitting at a body shop pretty much on the beach. And when I went and looked at them, I fell in love with one of them, which was a 1972 R75/5 BMW that I put over 100,000 miles on, completely went through the bike, sold it to a friend of mine in Carmel, California, bought it back from him 20 days later, and then rode around for a bit, went through the bike again, and sold it to a gentleman in Southern California who's really big into Land Rovers.
Huh. Funny world.
Yeah. There seems to be a connection there between...
So when you... I'm sorry. When you started doing this with this first bike, at the time you were a bicycle racer and a surfer and a skateboarder and all that sort of thing?
Well, I grew up skateboarding. Never really got into surfing. All my friends did. You know, I kind of float like a rock. Never felt comfortable in the water. So for me, it was bicycling, skateboarding. And again, no skateboard was ever left alone. No bicycle was left unchopped up and repainted. And
well, I consider you a born artist, and I hope you self-identify as being an artist, because the businesses you've been in to make a living, first Eurotech was when I was getting parts from you, and today Boxer Metal, and you're starting a new one on the road.
We got Going, Went.
Going, Went.
Yeah,
that's coming soon.
Yeah.
They're all different ways to make a living from doing art, fine art, I think. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a passion for something and there's no reason not to make it your life and follow through with it. And you don't have to be a Van Gogh. You don't have to be anybody famous, whether it's music or movies or designers. Just be yourself and believe in yourself.
And your childhood area was mostly populated by Hispanic people, and
it was growing up, I grew up in an all African American community, and about a mile, or I grew up about a block from a square mile housing project, and we were all poor, and all of us kids were trying to keep our bicycles together and be cool about it. And in about it had to be the mid 70s, our older friends were getting cars and they were turning them into lowriders, and I was thinking we could build lowrider bicycles
and models.
And we did plastic models too. But it started with the bicycles, and in junior high school we had metal shop, so I could take a frame in and cut it up and weld it back together, and I learned how to weld and do some machining at a very young age, as well as my dad had a welder in the garage and a lathe and plenty of hand tools, and so really nothing stopping. And then for the model part of it, my parents during that time opened up a hobby shop in a barrio in Salinas, California, and mostly focused around radio control. So as a young kid, I raced radio control boats, and at a young age I was national champion. We also raced electric cars, and I really loved plastic models. And since we're in a barrio and the kids would come in and here's this little white kid and wants to hang out with these guys and relate to them, I figured out how to make a 1/25th scale plastic model hop like a lowrider does.
Cool.
And I taught these kids how to build plastic models, make them hop and paint them, and it was a good time for a few years.
Well, you're going to hear this a couple times during this next half an hour. You made these mass-produced products unique and your own through artistic efforts,
yes,
modifications. You said in the pre-interview that you found as you got older that you were ADD, dropped out of high school, and you've made it more of a blessing in your life path than a curse.
Yes.
And I think that's important for people to realize that today they call that being neurodivergent or something like that.
Like eclectically odd, and with a penchant for no sleep. I mean, there's
and fearlessness with what you can do with your eyes and your hands, and unafraid to play with something in your hands in front of your face until you got it to cooperate and be the way you wanted it.
Well, I actually didn't think about it until my wife said something a couple years ago. So, late 50s at that point.
You start to.
She's like, you realize you have ADD. And I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
So, we talked about it for a while. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And I started looking back through the past of my life and the things I've done.
Figured it out.
Yeah. And how easy it is to start something and get bored with it and move on. And
so as you transitioned from childhood into your own life, you ended up working at a Porsche dealer, cutting sushi as a sushi chef, a few other jobs, and being mentored by people who saw your talent, your raw ability.
Well, I was blessed growing up that, because my dad was a car guy and a motorcycle guy, I got to meet a lot of very talented people. And, at 13, I was spending my summers working in a sign painter shop in learning how to hand paint signs and pinstripe.
Hand pinstripe,
Yeah.
the old school way.
Old school, yeah. And friends with hot rod shops and machine shops and motorcycle shops, and when I dropped out of high school after repeating, I don't remember, it was the 9th or 10th grade twice, but I was bored out of my mind. I rented a warehouse space and started detailing cars. And because of growing up in the Monterey Bay and my dad knowing everybody in the car business, I was able to pick and choose my clients. So I stuck to, Ferrari and Rolls-Royce and Porsche and Mercedes and all the higher-end cars. And at a very young age, I was making a lot of money. Of course, didn't know what to do with it other than spend it. And
did that, at some point you got on that /5 you built from the junk and took a motorcycle trip with a bedroll or
yes,
something?
Yep, that was probably 10 or 12 years later. So I went from dropping out of high school. I had 2 cars prior to that, of course not stock. I had a 66 Mustang with a small block Chevy and an M22 transmission and a 4.9-inch axle. Got 7 miles to the gallon. I had a 2-door 61 Ford Falcon with a straight 6 and all the Offenhauser hot rod parts. I had a 59 Bug with a big bore motor in it. It was lowered. And then...
but all of these were your creation.
Yeah,
you did the engine swap, and you
yeah.
did the lowering.
Well, the engine swap, the Mustang I got from a friend of mine who'd done it, and then I kind of finished the car off. And then I got into cycling. And I pedal cycling, and I rode competitively for quite a few years until I injured myself. Building my own bicycles, learning how to lace wheels, and then I decided at one point before I got my first motorcycle that I was going to have a bicycle frame built. I was going to get on my bicycle and just go travel for a year or two. And I met a guy. I had always had friends that had motorcycles, but I met this one particular guy, my buddy Rico. We're still friends today, in the mid '80s, and he was really into motorcycling. He said, "You got to get a motorcycle. You got to get a motorcycle." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I was living with my mom on Cannery Row at the time, and I said, "Mom, I'm going to go buy a motorcycle." And she's like, "Yeah, you can do that when you move out." So about a year later, Mom moves out, and I stayed in the house, and I bought my first motorcycle. I bought it brand new. It was a 1987 Kawasaki EX500.
That's a twin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, I changed out some of the bodywork and had a belly pan and changed exhaust and paint, and because Chris can't leave anything well enough alone.
Right. And
I borrowed some soft luggage from Rico. I had all my camping gear from bicycling, and I bought a rain suit. This is pre-Aerostich.
Yeah.
And I'd had the bike about a month, and I'm like, if I'm going to learn how to ride, I need to do a road trip. So I got out the map, and I kind of highlighted where I wanted to go. I want to go someplace I'd never been before, so I started off and I went to the Grand Canyon, then Zion and Bryce in southern Utah, and then through Caliente, through Las Vegas, and back. And it took about a 2-week trip. And I rode through sleet, snow, crazy winds, rain, and I was hooked. There was nothing stopping me at this point.
And so there was a transition from the Kawasaki to the world of the BMWs, and why, and what happened?
So during this time, I decided that I wanted to go back to school and get my GED. I don't know why. It just seemed like the thing to do. So I went to the junior college in Monterey Peninsula College. And I'd lived down the street from a sushi bar. And I had a friend introduce me to sushi in the 80s. I'm like, wow, this is cool.
It was very uncommon at the time. In America. There's very few places.
But I'd had a couple jobs in restaurants, and I'd been, cooking a little bit in kitchens, and loved cooking and loved food. And then there was the artistic part about sushi.
Very precise.
Very, very. So I kept going back, and I go, I'll work for free. I just want to learn. I'll work for free. And in about 6 months, I finally broke them down. And I started working for free.
Cool.
That turned into a paying job. They gave me a condo to live in, and all I had was my Kawasaki. And I wanted I wasn't really making any money. I was going to school. And so my old boss, that I'd known most of my life, he was the parts manager at the Porsche BMW dealership. And I'd worked for him previously as well. I said, "Hey, Mike, do you have any part-time work for him?" And he goes, "Yeah." So the guy that took my place came out from New York, and he had a 1988 BMW R100 RS, and I had my Kawasaki, and I was, it's an old man's bike, blah, blah, blah. Why would you want to ride one of those things? They're slow.
Yeah.
And during that, over the next few months, Mike, my boss, he goes, "Hey, at this body shop over in Sand City, there's 2 BMW motorcycles. One looks kind of old, one looks kind of normal. And you should go check them out." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." And he brings it up a couple more times. I'm like, "Fine." So I went over on my lunch break, and I see these 2 bikes, and this one that looks really old is really cool. No idea anything about BMW motorcycles. There's no internet.
Right.
You can't go to the bookstore and find a magazine on BMW motorcycles.
Right.
There's just nothing out there. And so I struck a deal. I think I paid $400 for both of them, and the owner of the sushi bar had a van, kind of load up in the back of the van somehow and drop them off at the condo I was living in. Figured, well, somebody had to put it together, so I'm sure I can take it apart and put it back together. Probably not correct the first couple of times, but I'll figure it out. And because there's no internet, where do you find parts? Where do you find information? So there was the, BMW Motorcycle Owners of America had a monthly magazine with the classifieds in the back. So, and there was always tech articles. So I'd take something apart, look at it, put it back together a couple times, and figure out how it would work or not work. And through that, one of the mechanics at the Honda, Kawasaki, BMW dealership in Monterey, which I also had worked at part-time, one of the mechanics was a BMW guy that had spent, at that point, he had spent 7 years never seeing winter. And
that's another fellow that intersects our little Venn diagram.
Yep, that is our friend Al Jesse, of Jesse Luggage, yep. And so I traded one of the BMWs, which was our early 80s R65, for help getting my /5 running.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I've got this old dilapidated BMW motorcycle. It barely starts, barely runs, barely stops, barely does anything, but it's cool. So I continue to work on it and learn and replace parts as needed. And a friend of mine who was a salesman at the Porsche BMW dealership lived in Santa Cruz, just north of Monterey, and he always asked me, what's going on in your life? What are you doing? And because along with all of this, when I was living in Canterbury Road before working at the sushi joint, I had a single car garage with a dirt floor with carpet remnants, and my tools hung on pegboard. And I did auto detailing, and I did air-cooled Volkswagen repair, and that sort of thing. So he was always curious to, what is Chris up to this time?
And people came to you already at this point by referrals, by somebody knew somebody who said, go to Chris.
Yes.
Go to Chris.
Yeah, I was already known for doing detailing because I grew up doing that with my dad. And my dad detailed cars for the Pebble Beach Concours, and I grew up going to that. And so Steve goes, "Well, I want you to meet this guy in Santa Cruz. He owns a BMW motorcycle dealership, and he's going through some stuff, and he needs some help in his parts department." And I was kind of a born and raised parts guy. My dad was always a parts guy, and so he kind of put something together, and I called up this guy Bill Plam, and I said, "My name is Chris Canterbury, and Steve Meyer suggested that I call you. Maybe we can help each other." He goes, "Sure, come up on a Saturday." So I got on my trusty /5, and I go up on a Saturday, and we start chatting, and we hit it off. Absolutely hit it off. So within a couple months, I'd quit the sushi bar, dropped out of college, stopped working at the Porsche BMW dealership, loaded everything I owned on my /5, and moved 40 miles north, rented a room, slept on a floor for almost a year, living off my /5, working at a BMW motorcycle dealer, helping him out. And over time, we fixed the bike up, and he was really into /5s, that whole 70 to 73 time period of BMW motorcycles, and we had a blast together, and we're still great friends today.
Did that experience lead to the formation of Eurotech?
It did, because through working at Plan BMW, which became BMW Santa Cruz, and I met a bunch of older guys that had done well for themselves, investments or career-wise. And one gentleman, John, had a Triumph mail order parts business years ago called Eurotech Triumph Restoration. And we'd sit around, chain smoking and drinking black coffee at 11 o'clock at night and talking about business and business plans. And
we were young once.
And along with that was my buddy Steve, who introduced me to Bill. And, so there was the three of us. And
well, there was certainly a demand for airhead BMW parts that wasn't being met by BMW of North America.
Well, but there wasn't. The only way to know that is to get the BMW Club magazine, because there was still no internet.
Right.
So, we designed a business on paper, with coffee stains and ashes, called Eurotech Motorsports. And John says, well, if you want to do this, let me know. And I took off for a couple months and I went to Oregon with my mom, not realizing that a 10-minute drive from my mom's was a place called Bent Beamer, which is another BMW motorcycle salvage business. If I'd have known that, I probably would have never come back to California. And so I went back, and John says, okay, well, here's some tools, here's some money. Find a building, figure out how a business runs and how to start a business. And so off I did, and we made some connections with other salvage yards and BMW motorcycle dealers for parts. And I started taking stuff apart. I hired my first employee. I'd never done that before.
But at about that time, Eurotech grew rapidly.
Yeah, so that was 1991. In 1993 or 4, we had, I think, one of the first mail order motorcycle websites ever.
Uh-huh.
I know John had spent a tremendous amount of money, and it was integrated into a DOS inventory system. And I mean, it was pretty complex for
the time.
For the time, yeah. And BMW people being an older crowd, not into computers, not willing to put their credit card number in a computer. So, a guy would place an order and he'd call you up right away and he goes, well, I'm not comfortable putting my credit card information in. I'm just going to give it to you over the phone. I'm thinking,
That was about the time Aerostich was getting going too, and we had that same experience with people.
Yeah. So we started off one employee, myself. John would stop by every once in a while. He had his own thing going on and taking bikes apart. And me being a parts guy, born and raised, everything was organized kind of by part number, as in the BMW system.
Right.
11 is engine, 12 is engine electrics, 13 is carburation, and on and on and on and on. And that way we could find everything.
We were so busy building this. Did you have time to do any customizing of bikes yet?
I built my first sidecar in '92, and that got me hooked on sidecars. And
you built it for a trip to Alaska, or
this is before that. Yeah, this is prior to that. So in '91, I started Eurotech, bought a house, got married.
Big deal.
And still managed to go to BMW motorcycle rallies all over the country, which was good promotion. Ride a bunch of miles. My wife at the time rode, and so there's a lot of that. And the business grew. At one point, we ended up with about 4,500 square feet of used parts. Had 2 guys stripping bikes. Had 4 sales guys, including myself, and a bookkeeper.
That's a nice little business.
Yeah, we did pretty good. And then...
But you weren't known as a bike customizer yet.
No. I mean, but as you imagine, you've got this endless supply of used motorcycles. I'm like, I can take this part and that part, and I can build something cool. And I built, I built stuff that was fast, and then we got into building early 70s BMW road race bikes. Then I started designing my own pistons and cam profiles and modifying brakes and lightning frames and doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, building them so they were more capable than the factory had made them.
Yes, I mean, we're competing with Honda 754s and guys with their 750 Nortons with the 850 kits, and we're kicking their butts.
Right.
With a rider that's like 215 pounds. He's a big boy. And back then too, there was guys like Chris Hodgson, who had CC Products. Now he's the owner of San Jose BMW. We had Reg Predmore, who had RPM cycles. He's a famous BMW motorcycle road racer. More on him in a bit too, because we did a TV series with him.
Yeah, I want to get to that stuff.
And then Matt Capri of Lufmeister. These 3 guys were like the guys in the U.S. that made old airheads go fast.
Right.
You know, in Europe we had Wudo and Fallert and a few others like that, and Krauser.
Yep.
So I learned a lot from those guys, as well as those guys were customers.
Right. And this is another intersecting part of our Venn diagram, because I knew many of those people as a rider and consumer. I built a custom BMW for myself back then. After much money and effort, it ended up being about as fast as a first generation Honda CBR 600. And my friends said, why did you do all this effort?
Because it's a BMW, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there was a lot of that going on. And then eBay happened. And used bikes were getting harder to find. I was getting a lot of my bikes out of Southern California. And so I had a guy down there that was finding bikes that I met at a BMW rally. A good friend of his was in a Moto Guzzi's and vintage Volkswagen air-cooled buses. Cycle Garden, Mo, super cool guy. And he would let me store like 5 to 10 bikes. And then my buddy Brian the Lion, when he was not doing the reserve Air Force thing, would get in his E100 van and a trailer, sometimes his R100 with a trailer, go to LA, pick bikes up and bring them back, and then we'd strip them apart. And we had some cool bikes, you know, early 70s choppers and all kinds of crazy stuff. We were even parting out, you know, bikes that were built with the three guys I mentioned, all their parts, as you know, hot rods back then, and parting those out. And then eBay happened, and then now we're competing with everybody and their brother selling everything out of their attic and their garage, and, you know, trying to compete with the prices, and that became difficult.
Did that lead to you becoming known as a custom bike builder?
No, years later.
Okay.
I decided that we needed to have new parts. So all the people that had been traveling around the world on their BMWs and stayed with me, I went and stayed with them and traveled around Europe and started finding new parts, new replacement parts.
One of the threads that I hear is that everywhere you went, you made friends.
Yes.
And that's a gift to be able to do that. I've never been able to do that very well, but
you just got to put yourself out there.
Well,
sometimes you get mud thrown at you, sometimes you get cake, you know.
But you were very good at it.
Yeah.
And got a lot of cake.
Yeah. So, you know, I learned a lot about people too and cultures, and that allowed me to travel. And then as time went on, I got more and more into sidecarring, and I started building my own sidecars for myself.
And I've seen a few of them, and they're amazing. And every one that I've ever seen, I've drooled over wanting. Oh, I wish I had that. And I'm sure you got that.
Well, the first time we met in person 30 some odd years ago, I was on my way back took us 2.5 days to go from Vermont to California. We stopped in here and said hi, and I was on one of those sidecars.
And I was drooling. Tell the audience, why sidecars? What did you like about them? Why them instead of a single track vehicle?
Well, I think might be apparent by now that I'm a little different. So I like things that are different. I like the fact that I don't have to put my feet down. I can have more creature comforts.
Right.
And, you know, there's nothing cooler than going up through the mountains and smoking some guy in his rice rocket on a sidecar.
No, there isn't. I can't imagine.
And so that got me into more fabrication. And during that time too, you know, I'm still building, you know, hot rods and vintage Volkswagens, and I'm doing that in my garage. I'm building custom luggage mounts for bikes that aren't available in Europe, and saddlebag suppliers over there don't have mounts for, and just kind of teaching myself. And then I'm doing some metal art and fencing and whatever. And
a lot of your income for some of this work came from word of mouth. People, again, go see Chris.
Always word of mouth.
Yeah,
I've never advertised, ever.
Always word of mouth.
Yeah,
because the products that came out of your shop and from your hands, you could look at them and see that an artist had made them. Sorry.
Well, I mean, if you're going to do something, at least try and do it right.
Or do it again and again until it's right. That's
and I've done that.
Another part of your
and I've done that
skill is that you're stubborn enough to not give up.
Yeah, I mean, you're not blessed knowing the knowledge of all, so
right.
You figure it out, and I remember when I bought a really nice hydraulic over air tubing bender, and I wanted to build a little roll bar for my sidecar so I could put my kids in and have a harness for them. And I took a piece of $60 chromoly tubing and I screwed it up in about 15 seconds.
But you made something you made it over and over again until it got right.
Until I had to buy more chromoly tubing. But I eventually got it. Yeah.
And you form the world into shapes to do what you want it to do. You make the world conform, and that's a real gift. A lot of people are unable or unwilling to be that persistent.
Yeah.
And art requires that. Yeah. It just requires it.
Well, then, you said earlier about, the Volksrad, the stretched out lowered Volkswagen that was 38 inches tall. There was kind of a trend going on, guys taking fenders off of Volkswagen Bugs and chopping them. And I'm still old school today. I mean, I've got a drawer full of all my drawings, all my templates on cardboard. And I just start drawing something out. And fortunately, at the time, in the little town that we're in, the junkyard still had some vintage Volkswagens in it. So I was able to go cut them up at the junkyard.
And just so our audience knows, 38 inches tall, the Ford GT40 car was 40 inches tall. This was lower than one of the Ford GT40 Le Mans $200,000 cars.
We'll get a picture for you.
Yeah, we'll put a picture up.
Yeah. And so, I built that, took it to a couple Volkswagen shows, ended up in a couple Japanese magazines, and then a friend of a friend had an old BSA and he wanted to set a land speed record at Bonneville. And he kept bending push rods and couldn't get the thing to run right. And me being a little bit of a motorhead, I'm like, I'll come with you and we'll figure it out. So we threw the Volksrad in a trailer, enclosed trailer, and hopped in the car with the kids and headed to Bonneville. And had a great time, and there's a picture that we'll throw up as well of my wife driving and the girls and I with their head through the sunroof. Yeah, it had a ragtop sunroof.
Your story is getting now so that it is becoming clear you are a real most interesting man in the world. having had all these travels and adventures and projects.
And we figured out the BSA, and after replacing an exhaust valve and multiple push rods, I'm like, okay, well, this is what you're going to do going down the 3-mile course, and this RPM and this gear and blah, blah, blah. And he was doing great, and he got excited, and of course, he bent a push rod and never finished and never got a record.
You must have seen the movie a few times, The World's Fastest Indian.
One of my favorites, yeah. Good old Burt Monroe.
Right. And your exploits are an American parallel to, doing these kinds of never say die things. And getting respected because you are doing them. Sure. I don't know if this is the right time or not, but I have a list of some of the things you made. If you want to, I can just go down the list and talk about them. In 2012, the first one on the list is the R90/6 sidecar Resto-mod and an R90 Resto-mod that was featured in Iron and Air.
Yep, that was the beginning of Boxer Metal.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's your second business.
Correct. After Eurotech and some big life changes, Boxer Metal became, and that was strictly BMW motorcycle customs and sidecars.
And you by that time you were starting to learn about digital printers and CAD CAM and some of that stuff.
That came a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, that came a little bit later. I'm still and to this day I'm still the ice cream stick and cardboard guy.
Building it analog.
Yeah.
Building them analog.
I surround myself with smarter people to get stuff done in CAD CAM and CNC and
So these clients came to you, and the guy with the R90/6 and told you what was the assignment?
He had half a dozen BMWs, didn't ride. They were all customized, and he had this one bike that he had a vision, and I don't even know how he found me. I mean, at that point, Instagram had just started, Facebook wasn't that old, To this day, I have no idea.
So did he tell you what he wanted, or did he just say, give me a resto-mod?
No, he had an idea, and he also had a bunch of parts. And we had a very similar idea of, we agreed on most things. Yeah, for sure. And then the sidecar guy, again, I don't remember how he heard about me. He lived in San Francisco, and I think, I don't know.
And the Iron and Air people found you through?
No, I contacted them. I had a friend of mine at the time who's still a good friend and a local photographer shoot the bike and submit it.
And we'll put pictures up.
Yeah, we can do that, yeah.
At that point, I may have the order wrong here.
That's fine.
At some point, you did a custom Mitsubishi Fuso 4x4 off-road, the Japanese market only off-road van, and you were the last time I saw you in California, you were at an early number 3 Overland Expo or something with your sidecar.
Yes, yeah.
But somehow a Mitsubishi Fuso custom that you built
was there,
and
yeah. So I got a phone call from a French couple who had been working with Four Wheel Camper. They make these pop-top truck bed campers. And I'd only met the owner once, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, maybe Mike. And they said, well, call this guy Chris. And I'd met him once at their business, and we must have had a conversation about me like fabricating and designing. And so this French guy had this idea of building a bed that would articulate and keep the bed of the camper shell or the camper itself flat, so it wouldn't blow apart and crack, and so stick figure drawing, and I had access to metal, and everything is water jet cut and laser jet cut. So I took his idea and I built this articulating bed. It was hinged with 1-inch bolts in the back, and you could twist both axles in opposite directions, and this platform stayed totally flat.
And no one had ever done that before.
Well, it's very popular today. I had not seen it back then. Yeah. No other Overland company, so to speak, that I had not seen that. Yeah.
At some point along the way here, you decided to take your sidecar, one of your personal sidecars, up to Alaska. In fact, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that was in 1996.
Yeah.
I needed a break, and I'd always wanted to see Alaska. And I reached out to a couple of buddies of mine that I rode with regularly and spent weekends with. And everybody else was pretty busy. And I had one friend that had he could take enough time away from work. And he had an R80 GS, he had an R100 RS, and he had an old R75/5. And he goes, well, which bike should I take? I said, take the /5.
Well, of course.
It's the least digital thing out there.
Yeah, and it's the least suitable for this trip, but let's go.
Well, it's got the same suspension travel as an R80 GS, so and it's the least digital. I mean, it's mechanical everything.
Yeah. So
we planned a trip, and I wanted to go all the way to Prudhoe Bay. And back then, we weren't on the Alcan very much. We went up went up the Cassiar, and that was 99% dirt. And then we went into Watson Lake in the Yukon. Then we took the Robert Campbell, which was all dirt, and that took us into we were heading to Dawson City at the time. And then we went over the top of the world, and then pavement to Fairbanks, where I have some family. Stayed with them for a night, and then we took 2 days doing the haul road to Prudhoe Bay, and then 1 day back. And that's 500 miles of dirt each way.
All on these old Airheads.
I was on my Airhead sidecar rig, and Ray was on his /5.
Yeah.
And the first day from Fairbanks to Coldfoot, which is the halfway point where second place you can get gas back then, it rained. And on the way back, it rained from Prudhoe Bay over Adigant Pass pretty much to Coldfoot.
You had already been an Aerostich customer for a while.
Yes, I had bought my Darien suit for that trip.
You bought one of the very first Dariens just after we introduced it.
Yep. It was like 94-ish.
Yeah.
Yep.
So thank you.
Yeah.
And you still have that jacket?
I have that jacket, and I actually wrecked in that jacket at about 70 miles an hour plowing through a landslide.
On that trip or on another?
No, on another trip. The trip, I was helping run a 24-hour endurance rally with an old friend of mine, and we were going through Death Valley, and the day before we were going through the middle of nowhere in Nevada, and he was on a K-bike, so we had a top speed of about 125, 130. I had a top speed of about 110, 115 on my sidecar, and so on the straightaways he would just leave me. And I could see him up in the distance, and anybody that's ever traveled through the worst parts of Nevada, they're the best parts of Nevada.
Yeah.
It's straight, and then it's twisty up and down a mountain, and it's straight again. So I'd catch him going up the mountains, and he'd take off again. So we were going through Death Valley one morning, really early in the morning, going over Town Pass at a Stovepipe Wells, I think it's called.
Yep.
And we're cresting the top, and I pass him in a corner, and I see the sign, caution, rock slides, landslides, whatever.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, whatever, those signs are always there. I come around a corner about 70 miles an hour, and the smallest rock is about the size of a semi-whale. and at that point, I've crested the hill, and so I'm going downhill, so I've got, all that momentum as well. So I did my best to hit the brakes. It spit me off. I spun around a couple times, and
luckily it didn't impact one of the big rocks directly.
I hit a few of them, bouncing off of them. And I had my Aerostich Darien on. If anybody's ever gone over Town Pass or goes through Death Valley, going over Town Pass, going west, right when you crest the hill, there's a pull-off on the right-hand side of the road, and there's a signpost just at the edge of the pull-off. And if you look at it, there's two marks in it, which are from the valve covers of a BMW motorcycle. That's what kept the sidecar rig from going over the edge.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, my Darien, I came out with a couple stitches and just bruises.
Let's get back to your workshop and your art.
Okay, so next vehicle.
I don't know if this is, again, in sequence or out of sequence, but I have an R1100 sidecar rig that was featured in Adventure Touring magazine.
I've done a few R1100s. I did an R1150 Adventure that was for a friend of mine in Southern California, and he wanted a sidecar rig that would be a recovery rig for one of the off-road riding schools. And so you had to be able to put a motorcycle in the back of it, like in a wheel chock. It had to have onboard fueling, onboard air, and then the last thing he hit me with was, how about an espresso maker? So
it was a wrecker with an espresso, a Starbucks wrecker.
Yes. So I found some aluminum cases, Argus cases, which are common for like saddlebags and stuff, and I bought a compressor and all the stuff, and I stuffed that in one of them, and I made them quick release, and they plug in any 12-volt like cigarette lighter plug. And then I took an espresso maker and I took it completely apart, and then I designed and built a housing for it out of copper and brass, and I used big industrial switches and knobs, and you could literally, wherever you were, you could have an espresso. You could be in the desert, you could be in the snow, you could have your espresso.
That's awesome. There are a couple more here, 2013 and 14. A VW family trip to Al Jesse's place in Arizona. He was at that time making aluminum saddlebags.
Yeah.
And also in 2014, that was featured. Something on that trip was the VW was featured in Cafe Racer TV, and then also on the Discovery Channel a year later. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Close. So, being a Volkswagen guy, our daughters grew up camping, and we always had some sort of Volkswagen camper. So Volkswagen did what they called a Synchro. It was an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive Volkswagen van.
Yep.
We had a tin top, so a hard top, that I made into a camper. We had a pop top, and of course neither one of those are stock. They had roof racks and tire carriers and lifted and bumpers and everything I fabricated myself, and that's what we traveled in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that trip, we went to the Grand Canyon for a winter break and decided that we'd come back through Phoenix,
Which is where Al Jesse
is, yeah, and see Al and his wife Julie, and because we'd always, been close friends and good friends, and
that's another part of our intersecting circle. Because when Al Jesse was starting to make his aluminum boxes, there weren't any aluminum boxes for adventure bikes, and he had a unique design and needed startup funding, and Aerostich was doing very well at that time, and we made he's from Iowa, a Storm Lake, Iowa, and that's where he was going to do his fabricating, and we made a deal to become the first Al Jesse bag dealer.
Oh,
so
that's awesome.
Intersecting Venn diagram.
Yep. Yeah, and so that would have been 2012, 13, I guess, 14.
Mm-hmm.
And while we're there, I'm up early one morning watching TV, and there was this TV program on Discovery called Cafe Racer TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I already built a few custom bikes, and that seemed to be where I was heading, with Boxer Metal, and I thought, wow, that would be really cool to be on a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
So the next year or so goes by, and ended up meeting a couple guys that had their own episodes on Cafe Racer TV, and I finally got an email address and a phone number for the producer of the show, and they had stopped the show, and they were rebranding it and calling it Naked Speed. They were trying to do more than just custom motorcycles. And when the first phone call I had with the producer, he's like, yes, as long as you're a good fit, I would love to do something other than a 754 Honda in our series.
Yeah.
And a BMW guy would be perfect. So he flew out. I had to have a customer and an idea for the build. So I had a customer, and
This was a couple from Guatemala?
no, that was later.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a friend of mine who was a commodities broker in Seattle, and I wanted to build a tribute bike, like a Helmut Dawn, who was a German BMW road racer in the 70s through the mid-80s. As Reg Pridmore was the same here in the U.S. So as we're formulating this plan, they couldn't get a hold of Helmut Dawn, and just logistically trying to get him to come to the U.S. and be on the show. So they said, well, we found this guy, Reg Pridmore. I go, I know Reg.
Mm-hmm.
I've known Reg a long time.
Mm-hmm.
That would be perfect. So we changed the color scheme of the bike, painted it like a 74 through 76 R90S, and we put his number on the side of it. And he was going to ride the bike around Thunderhill Raceway as the end of the episode. So we did our filming, which was interesting. We had to basically build two frames, because we built a complete custom frame. My buddy Artie, who's an amazing fabricator, built the tank, and he's on the TV show with us, which I've not been able to find. I think Discovery was sold and all that stuff is gone. And we built this kind of Helmut Dawn replica Reg Pridmore road race BMW.
Cool.
Yeah, and there's pictures of that we can show too.
At some point, this exposure, though, rapidly increased the business size of Boxer Metal.
Yes, the TV show really put us on the map.
Yeah.
Yeah. No matter where I was, I remember going to the Porsche Volkswagen Toy and Literature Show in L.A. with my good friend Sean. And I'm walking around outside, and people are going, hey, you're that guy from the TV show. And that was pretty common.
Yeah.
So it was quite a bit of recognition. The phones are ringing off the hook. We're selling more product from our website.
And you're selling parts that you engineered and designed so that people could bolt on a customization that you've created onto their stock BMW.
The idea behind the Boxer Metal website is that everything that is sold on the website is stuff we use in the builds in the shop. And if it's, obviously some of it's going to be completely one-off, and that's what keeps that bike specific or special to that customer. So I'm not going to, and I've had people ask me to reproduce stuff, very specific things, and I say no. I go, that's very specific to that
build.
Yeah, that's their build.
But some parts,
there's quite a few parts. Yeah, there's anywhere from 10 to 12, and I've probably could do another 15 or 20, which is something that I'm going to work on
in the next.
It'll happen. It'll start happening January 2025. Yeah.
So at this point, you're pretty famous within the circle of custom BMW people.
Yeah, we're going to motorcycle shows, and we're getting awards for going to those shows, and people are recognizing the name, both Chris Canterbury and Boxer Metal.
Right.
And then in 2016,
I've got notes.
In 2016, I had finished up a really nice R100 build for a couple in Guatemala. Absolutely wonderful people. And the bike was specifically built for them to ride 2-up. In the colors they wanted. We had custom triple clamps, made with the name of the bike, Tiffy on it, and just a beautiful, clean, simple build, which is kind of the Boxer Metal philosophy. Build something that you'll ride coast to coast.
And at this point, you're in a shop the size of a 3-car garage, basically.
I'm in
4-car garage. And you've got equipment in there, lathes and
a year. About 6 months before the TV show, I was in 900 square feet. And 3 cars, and you're sucking your gut in to walk through the shop. Yeah.
Right.
And then things had grown enough, and we were running out of room, and I also needed more equipment. I needed a bigger lathe, I needed a mill. And in the same complex I'm in, a bay opened up that was twice the size. And so I called up some buddies and said, hey, I need help moving. So literally we moved across the alleyway in about 3 hours. Of course, it took weeks to set everything up.
Right.
And then I did that same call out again when we got accepted to do the TV show, because we painted everything. We wanted everything to be crisp and clean and put away and so on and so forth. And I've been in that shop since, I've been in that shop probably 12 plus years now. Yeah.
At some point.
So back to the
Guatemala couple.
I was going to take their bike to the One Motor Show in Portland, Oregon, which happens late winter, early spring every year. And we're also working logistics on shipping the bike to Guatemala. And they actually flew into California. We picked them up at the airport. And we did a video in Spanish with them. It's a very cool video. It's got good music. It's fun.
Well, I bet.
Yeah, and we can share that too.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want.
I do.
Yeah. So here it is, early December. I've got 7 weeks to build something. I don't really have.
And that bike is not available.
That bike's not available, and I don't really have anything else that is kind of show worthy.
Right, but you had a garage or a shop full.
I have a shop full of junk,
full of odds and ends.
Yeah,
What can I do with?
Yeah. So I just start going through the shop, and I'm laying everything out on the floor and going, okay, I can do this, I can do that. And then I go home and I love graph paper. Graph paper and a sharp pencil, and I are good friends.
Yeah.
And I start drawing something out. I'm like, okay. They called them slingshots in the old days, and it was a long, stretched out Harley.
A drag bike.
Yeah. And I wanted to build a BMW version of a slingshot.
Just because it's there like Mount Everest.
Yes. Yeah.
Nobody had ever done it before.
No. And in my mind, it was in my face. You know, I could clearly see what I wanted to do. And, but I had 7 weeks. So I'm like, okay, I can build something kind of cool and get it running.
Or
I can build something outrageous, but it won't run. But the biggest qualifier was, if I build something simple, the girls get Christmas. If I build something outrageous, the girls... No, excuse me.
The other way around.
The other way around. If I build something that runs, the girls don't get Christmas. If I build something outrageous that doesn't run...
As a display piece,
the girls get Christmas.
Right.
Because I figured just to build the motor alone to make it run would have been about $10,000.
Yeah.
In fact, the guy that ended up with the bike, and we can talk about that in a bit, at one point wanted me to get it running, and I'm like, you don't want to spend that money.
Right.
So I grabbed a frame that I had a title to, and I cut the engine mounting lugs off the bottom of it so I could weld the frame to my welding table. And I started hacking away, and I got out my tubing bender, and I just went nuts for 7 weeks.
And what came out of that other end of that
was a twin turbocharged stretched BMW motorcycle with fuel injection, 2 turbos, and everything was there except for the motor was hollow.
Yeah.
Because it didn't make any sense to throw non-running parts in a non-running motor.
Correct.
But the controller for the ignition and the fuel injection was there. The fuel injection was there. The line lock to lock the front wheel was there, so you could do a burnout. All the electrics were there. I 3D printed an insert for a 7-inch headlight so I could run a Baja Designs off-road light.
Yeah, that square insert.
Yeah, that square insert. And the idea was, when we get back, I'll just build a motor. And, you know, the turbos were huge. Would it ever spool up? Who knows? That wasn't the point. Let's just get it running.
Well,
and so,
very sculptural.
Yeah. So get it done, throw it in the back of the shop van, drive to Portland, unload the bike, and from the moment the door in the van was open, and this is before crowds are there, this is other builders checking in and getting their photo taken of their bikes, people are going, what the F is that? And freaking out.
Yeah, because it was outrageously,
yeah.
and we're going to put a picture up there.
Yeah, and that year, the show was also sponsored by BMW. So some representatives from BMW were there, and they had an award for their bike of choice. And we pissed a lot of people off because it didn't run, and there was other guys that were, you know, custom local guys and BMW guys that thought that they should have won. And the bike was very well received. So we won the Motorrad Award, which was a trophy and a very expensive custom-made jacket. And we left the show, and my wife and I both got really bad colds. And so the reason we're in Duluth now is because I'm here with my best friend Alex. Well, Alex also lives in Portland, and we'd go to the show, we'd stay with Alex. So I was in Alex's spare room for a week, sick as a dog. Yeah. And during that time, we get a email or a text from a local couple that we had met, and they had started an online scene called Engine Enthusiast, and they wanted to photograph the twin turbo, and then they were just starting off. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I figured out, let's go to the, what is it called, where the Spruce Goose is? It's the
Airplane Museum.
Yeah, in Oregon, yeah. And so I called him up, and I said, hey, this is what we want to do. This is when we want to do it. And we showed up, and it was a rainy day. We backed the van inside, and we had full rain of this amazing museum.
Yeah.
And the docent, we had him for a whole day, and the photographer and my wife were able to, like, go in places in the Spruce Goose I don't think most people have ever been in, and other airplanes like that. And we did this photo shoot. So at that point, also during that time, Michael Lichter, who's a very well-known motorcycle photographer, he's mostly Harley's Easy Rider magazine, world-renowned photographer, super wonderful man. BMW Motorcycles paid him to do a photo shoot of the bike while we were still in Oregon prior to that.
For Motorrad, the German magazine.
Yeah. BMW Motorrad, BMW Motorcycles of Germany. The bike is on somewhere buried in their website. Yeah.
Well, it's the most outrageous airhead BMW that's ever been built, I think.
It's kind of ridiculous.
Well, still, it's kind of a calling card for your skill as an artist and as a designer and as an engineer.
Right. So there again, the bike goes viral worldwide. It's in like 9 gazillion online magazines and print magazines in a bunch of different languages. We take it to the Quail, the motorcycle gathering at the Quail in Carmel. we get to hang out with, people like Keanu Reeves, who's a super nice guy, and win an award there. And then we get invited to the Beverly Hills Concours, where we get to meet Jay Leno, and I'm with him for a very brief period of time, and won that. And the bike just kind of became like a child supermodel,
And I saw the listing on Bring a Trailer when it was sold.
Yes.
For $23,000.
Yeah.
I went and figured out where to do that, and we'll post that on the screen.
Okay.
So people can go to the Bring a Trailer listing, where there is 144 professional photographs of the bike.
Yeah. All taken by my wife.
Yeah. It's a very, if you want to see
Yep.
the most outrageous BMW Boxer ever made.
Or just Google twin turbo BMW motorcycle. It's all over the internet still today. Yeah. And pick your language.
Yeah.
So that was the next step of the pyramid, climbing up.
It's kind of almost hard to top that. But what makes you, in my view, one of the genuine most interesting men in the world is it's not like you just did one kind of thing. You went to Alaska, you went camping, you did the most extreme custom builds anywhere. It's a cliche to say someone did it all, but in your career, which is far from over, you've done it all.
I've done a lot,
really wide range of things. So, but just to close, you want to talk a little bit about how you were the first, or one of the first customizers of VWs and bikes, but mostly VWs, that was okay with the worn patina. I don't know what that's called now.
Oh, the whole patina look,
Yeah, that's been a popular look for 10 years.
I wouldn't say I was one of the first, but I was definitely early on, and somebody that thought that was a much better way to go.
Yeah.
And my last build really reflected that, which was my '68 Ford F-250.
Yeah, and there's that's the slammed one on the
on the police car chassis.
The Crown Victoria chassis. And
again, that's on Bring a Trailer, and there's 9 gazillion pictures that Rebecca took of that.
The story you told me a couple of days ago about when you got some money and you bought yourself a new Porsche is a funny story for an artist.
Right. So growing up in a Porsche, BMW, Volkswagen environment, I told myself when I turned 40 I was going to buy myself a Porsche. So I traded in my 2001 Golf GTI, which was a cool car.
Yeah, they are cool.
And not stock.
I know. That doesn't surprise me.
For a Porsche Boxster. I don't remember what year it was. It had to be early 2000s. It's whatever I could afford.
But it was new and it was stock. Or it was almost new. It was clean.
It was used, and I did wheels and tires on it and lowered it a little bit, and because I couldn't leave it stock.
No.
And I was afraid to drive it. I was afraid that I was going to park it someplace. I was going to get a door ding. I'd paid somebody to do PDR, paintless dent removal, a couple dings that were in it when I bought it, and I finally ended up just renting my neighbor a spot in my neighbor's garage and parking it there and never driving it.
Because it was
too nice.
Yeah.
I'd never owned anything that nice.
Yeah.
And I told myself never again. So, our 71 lowered camper was patinaed, my shop truck, even the motorcycles I built for myself. I'd rather have good old crusty paint with a little bit of rust than something that's really shiny.
You have a philosophy about building a bike. In one sentence, you would not build something that you wouldn't ride coast to coast on.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool philosophy. And that's a long way, even though the drag double turbocharged bike was not for that use.
Well, no, I wouldn't build something for a customer that I wouldn't personally ride coast to coast. For myself, I'll build anything. The last show bike I built was an early 70s BMW that I designed, foot clutch, hand shift, rigid frame, and I found some weird gas tank on eBay in Russia or the Ukraine, and it had some great patina. And we did some modifying of the tank and built the speedometer into the tank, and I didn't want to paint it. It was dark green and light green and kind of rusty, and so after all the welding was done, Rebecca, my wife, she sat there and she color matched around the welds, and you couldn't tell.
Oh, cool.
And then we had it clear coated after that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We'll have pictures superimposed on some of this dialogue
Sure.
of our talk of some of these bikes, and we'll have links on the thing. But to wrap it up, do you have anything else you want to talk about? Because I just want to thank you for coming and doing this.
Follow your dreams. I mean, if you have an idea, don't just think about it, do it. If you screw it up, do it again. Figure out how to do it. That's something I'm going to be working on helping people do in the next couple of years is design works is what we're calling it. And
That'll be
if you got an idea, make it happen. If you want to build something, build it.
And what URL do you want at the bottom of this so people can reach out and find you?
Oh, I don't know. You could do boxermetal.com, goingwent.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. And
Thanks for having me.
It's been a wonderful 35-plus year relationship, friendship. You've added a lot to my life and a lot to a lot of other riders' lives. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for, I've really enjoyed my time here in Duluth and spending time with you and
Thanks.
and the missus. It's been wonderful.
And all you watching this, thanks for watching.